Hello again, YouTube. I'm back at it again. And to be perfectly honest with you, I still don't know why I'm doing this. Which is a tough question that I need to find the answer to, otherwise, we're not going to get anywhere. Not you, not me, we're just going to be like running around in circles. My eyes kind of look pretty today. I suppose I've been spending a lot of time in the dark, you know, acting like a nocturnal beast. You see, I have been staying awake until about now. It's about 6, 7 in the morning right now. And I've been going to sleep. That way I'm not awake during the day. Because it gets hot during the day. And I do a lot of nocturnal activities as of late, because of my poor status in life. What I will do is, when it gets dark outside, I'll go out and I will scavenge for cigarettes and I will scavenge for food, because, I don't have money to buy these things. And this is just the state of things as it is. And to be honest with you, I'm really angry and upset with myself because I've allowed for this, But the alternative, so my alternatives in life, right? Because I used to be, the phrase is proud to be 103. I was part of an electrician's union, right? And, some people thought that, I was getting set up. I was going to be, I don't know, good to go. You work the career, you work until you're, I don't know, 50, 80, however fucking long you're supposed to hold a career. And then, you retire and you get your retirement package, which can, big terms that everybody's always using, just like, oh, your annuity is going to be this high and you're going to have this much and you'll be able to get a pension for this much and you'll be able to live out the rest of your days and get checks every month or something like that. And just just the idea of always working to try to secure a future, and I was never optimistic about living to the future. I was never optimistic about growing old, It's just what about now? What about life now? While I'm young, while I'm supposed to be doing stuff, when I'm supposed to be having adventures, when I'm supposed to be I'm not supposed to work my entire life away for somebody that doesn't give two shits about me. And if they did give two shits about me, well, why did they send me an email saying that I got terminated and do not respond to this email because it is an automated response? Just no. I didn't have real friends there because where are they now? And that's the question everybody should always be asking. Just who are your true friends? Are they actually there for you? And, well, it's been made abundantly clear that I don't have friends. And, perhaps that might be a little unfair for me to say because I've also ostracized myself from other people. But at the same time, no, I cut off people that weren't good for me, for me personally. Anyway, I didn't know anybody anyway. Doesn't really matter, I'm all over the place. But I'm just aggravated and angry that I'm walking around and I'm bumming cigarettes off of the ground, and it's disgusting. And it's pathetic. And just how would you let yourself stoop so low, And it's just someone that had a higher standard for themselves and you wouldn't allow this. They wouldn't be in this boat, would they? I don't know. I don't know. It's hard for me to like think for other people as well. I feel like a lot of people, they just sort of bumblefuck their way and then somehow it works, somewhere along the lines. And everybody gets pigeonholed and everybody gets trapped in, their own little cage or whatever, you know. And everybody's trapped and just on the gerbil wheel, just spinning around. It's just like, well, what do you mean by that? I run myself in circles with this, and there's no breaking out of it. But just like, why didn't you stay at the 103? Why didn't you just like, I mean, if you're just gonna stay at home and be a pathetic bum and do nothing and contribute nothing to society, just like, why not just show up to work? And I suppose this question bugs the shit out of me because, it's just like, okay, so every other day I wake up and wish I was dead, and, because I can't bring myself to do it, the only alternative is to go work a job that I don't want, to contribute to a society that I don't want to be in, so, just like, that's pretty grim. Gotta pay for an apartment that I don't want, that I don't like, filled with shit that I don't want and I don't like. Got these side tables that I hate because, they're weirdly shaped. They're not a square. It doesn't fit a chessboard. It's not a real coffee table. Hate the bed frame because it got infiltrated by cockroaches. Had to take the motherfucker outside. Well, the first time I tried to clean it, and just like it made me so angry because also, not people are probably going to judge the fuck out of me, but whatever, I'm a 2-bit loser, just like, I don't know, it doesn't even matter. But, so I had an incident with like fruit flies and like cockroaches or whatever in the apartment. And when I first moved here into this apartment, they just showed up one day. And I was just like, what is that? And it's just like, oh, that's a water bug, aka cockroach. And I was just like upset because that means that I have cockroaches in my apartment, right? Which is a bad reflection on me. Which means I'm a disgusting person. I can't bring people over here because they're going to see a cockroach and I'm like, oh, I can't be there. Cockroaches are disgusting. They're nasty, right? Then I had like a fruit fly infestation, bought bananas, and just like all of a sudden there's fruit flies. Just like, what am I supposed to do? And so in the past when I had a fruit fly problem, I would go to the store and I would get that special fruit fly trap. It's like an apple-shaped container, and you put some droplets of like some, I don't know, sugarcane water, it might be something else, into it, and it attracts them inside. They get trapped and they die over time. And they also have fly ribbons. And I've tried like a bunch of these in the past, but that leads me up to, I bought a can of Raid, bug spray, it was flying insects, it kills it, right? So I brought it home one day, and then I was just like, alright, you motherfuckers are all gonna die now. And then I started to spray them, and then I just watched them suffer. And all I could picture in my mind is, this is exactly what they did to the people in Nazi Germany. And I understand that might be a huge jump, but I'm just like, I am killing them by gas. They are gasping for breath. They cannot breathe. Their eyes are they're watering, they're squeezing, they're gasping for breath. And I was just like, I can't use this Raid product. I can't kill these guys. you know? Because there's like little guys and there's big guys, so you know that there's babies. So I'm killing somebody's babies and somebody's parents. And it's just like, you are a fucking crazy person. You care about the bugs? And it's just like, I said that all life was sacred. And it's just like, and I have to hold myself to that, right? You know, because the alternative is no life is sacred, no lives matter, you know? And it's just like, I understand that that's probably a pretty extreme statement, you know? So now my place has got cockroaches, it's got fruit flies, and you know, I don't know how to deal with them because I know that I don't want them here, but I don't want to exterminate them either because they're just living their lives, you know? They're just they're just eating, they're just drinking, they're just using the restroom, you know, they're not hurting me, you know, they're not malicious. Sometimes I make up stories that, you know, they're kind of like roommates and they're trying to clean up after me because I'm doing a poor job of doing it. She's like, don't worry, bro, we got the dishes. She's like, thanks, bro. No, I know that that's silly and that probably makes me disgusting. But listen, this is nothing that you didn't already know, right? And if you didn't know, now you know. And, you know, further, you know, once upon a time, you know, when I first started moving here and, you know, before I let things fall apart the way that I have, you know, I noticed that there were mice in the apartment. And I, you know, didn't know how they got in, so I found their mouse holes and I went to the store and I bought caulking and I bought, you know, the wire mesh sponge and I tore that to ribbons and I plugged the holes with the wire mesh and then caulked on top of it. And, you know, I found holes behind the fridge and in the corners, and so I plugged it all. And, you know, the mice kept finding their ways in, you know? And, you know, so I would be like studying, you know, some electrical homework, and then there'd be sounds from the kitchen, you know, the mice were in there. And they would just make these distracting, like, scratching sounds. And so I would go and I would chase out the mice because they were annoying me. You know, I didn't want them to be there. And then, you know, like a while later, you know, I remember, well, I had quit my job. You know, I had been unemployed and I've just been trying to figure out what I'm supposed to do with my life. And so I see this mouse and it's trying to get into this trash bag that I had in the living room. You know, I had like picked up all the trash, I stuck it in a bag, and I was gonna take it out later, but I just like didn't get around to doing it. So there was this mouse that was trying to get into this trash bag, and I was just like, why is this mouse trying to get in this trash bag? You know, there's nothing good to eat in there. You know, and I thought about my own pitiful existence, and I thought about how I didn't have any food to eat. And because what I was struggling with at the time, what I'm still struggling with is, you know, because at that specific time, I was trying to figure out how to live off grid. You know, how to not be a part of society. You know, how to live on my own somewhere else and be unbothered, you know, and to stop giving people power over me, you know, and to just like live my life. And well, I didn't find an answer, but specifically, you know, I was thinking about like going off into the wilderness. And if you've ever read the book Robinson Crusoe, he gets stuck on an island and he builds a fort and he lives there, you know. And, you know, so I was always attracted to the idea of like going off into the woods and into the forest and being away from society and just like living there. You know, make a tree house, make a house made out of bricks. You know, make the bricks from like adobe. You know, make mud houses, make a dugout, make something. You know, start a garden. And that was the main thing because it was just like, you know, how does one get food? Because the main issue is, right, we've become a society where money is more important than food, water, and shelter. Because you need money to buy food, money, and shelter. And even if you didn't have food, money, and shelter, and you didn't have money, you're still required to like pay taxes and stuff. So they're trying to milk because people are just a resource, you know, and everything gets funneled upwards. But so I'm thinking it's just like, okay, you know, I can't legally go out and start a garden somewhere and, harvest what I grow and eat it, and survive like that. I'm not allowed to because I have to buy the land or I have to rent the land. And so, if I went out somewhere and built a primitive home and started a primitive garden, someone come along and tell me, you can't be there, you know, and fine me like money that I don't have. And so it's like ridiculous, but I'm thinking, because the main issue is starting a garden, how long it takes to grow the garden, and like some of these plants that I've was like looking at, they take like between like 90 days or something like 16 to 90 days. And it's just like, well, how am I supposed to survive 60 to 90 days while those crops grow? Because I don't want to kill the rabbits. You know, I can't validate killing other things to keep myself alive because I just don't matter. You know, I don't. And even if I did matter, I mean, I'm still struggling because I still eat meat. I haven't fully quit. Like, trying to move on to, the veganism type lifestyle diet is pretty expensive, I think. I mean, I wouldn't know because I haven't actually done it. I know that they have stuff like Beyond Meat and, other substitutes. I've been meaning to learn how to make tofu from scratch, and I've been watching videos and how to make tofu good. I made tofu on one occasion, and I put it in spaghetti. I made like a tofu spaghetti sauce, and when I tried to eat it, it was like eating a sponge, and I couldn't do it. I need to figure out how to make tofu well, because I just don't want to kill animals anymore. I don't want them to die, because the life conditions that they have to live are extremely awful, no matter what the packaging says, because everybody's a fucking liar. Everybody misconstrues things intentionally to give the idea that things are better than they are, but they're always worse. You always look behind the curtain and it's always worse, you know? Or maybe that's just my dark-sided opinion on things. Anyway, but, so you can't start this garden, somebody's gonna move me. It's just like, you have to pay for land, you have to pay rent. I'm thinking about farmers. Like, if you own like a farmland, right? And you would just want to live your life to yourself and you want to stay there and just like you want to, take care of your chickens and your chickens give you eggs. And I recently learned that chicken eggs are, well, chickens were bred specifically because when they lay an egg a day, that egg is not a baby chicken. Because this was something I was concerned about. Because I was just like, do we really, like, because before this, I had thought that they must get chickens, they must get chickens pregnant every day to lay eggs. So does that mean, they they go into love mode? I'm using a Minecraft reference, but if I was going to be crude about it, just like, does that mean that they fuck every day and they lay an egg every day? It's just like, that's wild to think about. But that's not the case, but they were bred because some chickens have the ability to lay an egg a day, and it's just, someone had referred to it, it's just like chickens having a period. It's their period cycle. It's like a natural occurring cycle for them. And then further, it just makes me wonder, does this hurt them? Is it painful to lay an egg every day? You know? But I just feel bad because it's just like, okay, you can't lay any more eggs. That means you're going to be turned into chicken soup. And it's just like, so they're only valuable as long as they lay eggs. And as soon as they don't lay any eggs anymore, they're slaughtered. And honestly, humans are a lot like that. And just like, so now we're like in an economy where it's just like, well, people that get off the gerbil hamster wheel and they end up homeless for one reason or another. And now they can get like arrested off the street and be forced into mental institutions to quote unquote get help. And, I don't know what anybody thinks about the concept of getting help. Because I know that everybody says, oh, you need help, you need psychological help, you need a shrink. And it's just like, well, imagine that they've been going to a shrink for years and it has been working because it's not a them problem. It's actually a systematic problem. It's a world problem. The entire world is wrong. And, they just can't get on board with how messed up everything is. But there are some people that actually do need therapy for different reasons. I can't put everybody in the same basket. But, so these homeless people, they get sent to mental institutions to get like hospitalized. It's just like what you just gonna give them happy pills and you think that's gonna solve everything, you know, and it doesn't. It's just like dope them up so much that they can't that they function like robots essentially, you know. And a lot of the population is already self-medicating. A lot of the population is, they're pretty much alcoholics or the weed addicts, And I've had my alcoholic phase. I had my weed phase. I'm currently sober, and I'm still on the cigarette phase. But and because there's no rooms at these hospitals, these mental institutions, they get jailed. You know, people get thrown into jail just because they're homeless. People would rather, people at the top would rather hide the problem, eliminate the problem, but it's not even that. It's to make other people who are still in the system be afraid. They're just like, oh, I can't lose my job because then I'll end up homeless and then I'll end up in jail because that's where homeless people go. And it's like criminalized to be like homeless. Which is extremely like ridiculous because the cost of living is so fucking high. You know? And just like some of these places, it's just like you can't buy a fucking closet. And so you're expected to what? Board with 5 other people that you hate, you know? And to be honest with you, I've done that before. You know, I used to I used to rent a room in a house with like 5 other people. And I tried to be friendly or whatever, but I'm an introverted person. I need my space. I need you to leave me alone. You know, and so I guess my anxiety was like so high that I wouldn't want to ever leave the room if possible. I would just stay in there. Like even here, I'll like go to the door and I will check the hallway to make sure that there's nobody in the hallway that I might interact with before going outside. It was the same there. I would like listen, outside the hallway, make sure that there was nobody like moving in the house that I might interact with. Trying to move in the house at off-peak hours. It's not that I disliked any of the people there. I just didn't want to interact with them. I didn't want to be perceived. You know, um, I don't know what it was. Just like I just didn't have the emotional bandwidth to actually talk to them, engage with them. I mean, it would get so bad that I wouldn't even go to the restroom. And so for a while, I just had lined up bottles of Gatorade bottles that I was just repurposing as a restroom. I was just pissing it, So I had it all like lined up. And when I ran out of Gatorade bottles, I'd just use glasses. And I was just like, I'm not leaving, I and the bathroom was just like right across the hall. It's like ridiculous, but I was just like, I don't. But going back to this mouse, this mouse is trying to get into this garbage bag, and, it just made me realize that me and the mouse, we're just the same. We're just biological creatures, and we're just like scavenging for food, just trying to stay alive. I mean, I don't know why I'm trying to stay alive, but maybe for the same biological reason it's trying to stay alive. And it's just like, and so I took pity on the mouse and I left it some fruit, right? And I was super annoyed because it was making a hole in the bag, and I left the fruit right in front of the hole, so when it went back to the hole that it was digging, it would find the fruit. But it just ignored the fruit and tried to make a new hole somewhere else, and I just didn't understand that. I just assumed that it didn't want the fruit. It didn't trust it, and that's fine. But ever since then, well, I took a can top and I have been putting rolled oats, wheat germ, breadcrumbs, and chia seeds on it. They don't like the chia seeds. They loved the wheat germ, but I ran out, and I haven't been able to get them more. I still have oats. I'm not eating the oats because I don't want to eat the oats. I'm bored of eating oats. Years of eating oatmeal, years of eating like overnight oats, and just like I'm oated out. You know. Not to mention I don't have any dressings to like make it taste good. I don't have like fresh fruit or anything else. Um, so it's just like bland, regular oats. Um, but so I've set up a feeding tray for them, and I've been setting up a water dish for them because the mice are adorable. They're these cute little creatures that just exist, and you know, I I just hate that nobody cares. You know, people just go to the store to buy mice for either lab experiments or dissection or to feed it to their snakes. And, it's just like, these guys are adorable. Like, nobody cares, though. So, now I have, like, lots of mice that come visit me, and I would like to pet them, but we're not on that level yet. They still don't trust me. And it's just like, oh, so not only is this weirdo just weird, but he also likes bugs and mice. And he's a slob, and, he's got bugs in his apartment, you know. It's weird. Because no matter how you look at something, there's always a good and there's a bad side to it. And, you know, if you're... Some people can only see one side and they'll hyper embellish it. But, I mean, don't they have a right to live, you know? Just like everybody else? You know, the cockroaches aren't disgusting anyway. They're these cool little creatures. Just like think, you know, God made cockroaches too, He sat down, okay, he didn't actually do this, but I have the idea that he sat down in his workshop or his computer, or whatever he builds his creatures on, and he constructed cockroaches. And there they are, And they got these cute little antennas that waggle like this, you know. Um, I mean, I still don't want them infesting all my shit. I mean, this entire apartment is probably gonna have to burn down. But I don't advocate for just like slaughtering them, because just like where else are the cockroaches gonna live, you know? Just like we can't keep moving everything to the margins, just like forcing it off to the side because we don't want to deal with it. There's that bumper sticker, coexist. Anyway, that's it for this one. Later.